across the city. There are also civilian checkpoints, and this is what Tamarrud was saying, that people should go out in the non-curfew hours, so during the day, and protect public buildings. Now, what I can tell you from being out on the street throughout the course of the day, there were a lot of people out saying that they're here to protect their house, they protect this building, and so on. I did see people who were armed. It's difficult to identify exactly who they were or which side they were on, but it contributed to this feeling of fear across the city, and I'm guessing in other cities too, that we really haven't seen here in quite a while. There was this feeling throughout the course of the day of chaos, essentially. People walking around in the street with guns, helicopters hovering up above us. So I heard several times the sounds of gunfire. You couldn't tell where the gunfire was coming from. So just to give you a sense of just how scary this day has been for Egyptians.
But then, Shireen, give us an idea. Are we seeing any mobilization at all of the anti-Morsi group, the sorts of people who were coming out before in large numbers? Has the wind been taken out of their sails by this heavy security crackdown, or are we still seeing turnouts in large numbers of anti-Morsi protesters?
No, I think that for the anti-Morsi protesters, after the coup, after Mohamed Morsi was deposed, it sort of, they handed over, if you like, to the military the idea of the kind of Egypt that they want to see. The idea of going out on the street to make that point, unless the military specifically called for it, isn't really there in the minds of a lot of people. I mean, we talked about those protection groups. Those people are certainly going out on the street heeding the call of Tamarrud, but there isn't a sense that we're going to see other groups calling for big anti-Morsi protests to to be on the streets to counter the other side, like we've seen in the past when there have been competing calls for protests. And
often in Egypt's history, in times like this, you have accusations that the so-called baltagir or thugs are being mobilized, the sort of plainclothes people that are accused of working indirectly for the Ministry of Interior. What sort of role or evidence is appearing about sort of role they may be playing?
It's one of those very difficult things to actually prove. At the end of the day, someone standing in the street who's armed, it's very difficult how do you define him as a protester? And if he's a protester, which side is he on? If he's not, how do you know if he works for the security forces? There are a lot of claims and counterclaims right now. Certainly if you watch certain channels, including state television, you will get a certain version of what is going on the ground. There's a lot of different competing versions of what's going on, and that's why the story is very murky, and it's difficult for us here, journalists and so on, to actually give you a real answer as to whether the baltagaya, the thugs, are actually operating on the ground. All I can tell you is that yes, there certainly are people who believe that that's what's happening.
All right, Shireen Tadros there from our Cairo bureau. Thanks for that. Let's take another look at the pictures coming out of Cairo. Those are live pictures coming out of Ramses Square, a very important square, close to a major train station, close to a major artery, the 6th of October bridge that runs through the country. So scenes like this of a building in a very critical area up in flames will be a chilling sight for many Egyptians, no doubt, tonight. Let's take a look at some of the protests taking place outside of the capital, though. In Ismailia, medical sources say 4 protesters were killed in the Egyptian city on Friday in clashes with security forces. Emergency services have told Al Jazeera 7 people have been killed in Egypt's second city, Alexandria. Gunmen are reportedly chasing protesters on the streets there. And in Asyut, further in the south, people defying the curfew coming out to protest. Let's bring into the discussion once again Ibrahim Sharqiya from the Brookings Doha Centre. Good to have you with us. I mean, looking at the situation now, I guess the bottom line in question is, where is it heading to now with the Muslim Brotherhood calling for a week-long series of protests?
There is no doubt that at least the coming week, we're going to see escalation on both sides. The military has already made its position very clear and decisive that it will respond in a very decisive way to the protests or to the to breaking the curfew. And the Brotherhood now is calling for 1 week of protests as well. We're seeing the different alliances emerging, and this is all creating, Sami, an environment of chaos and confusion within the Egyptian society. And for that reason, we're seeing the protests are spreading all over the country. In the past, 2-3 years, we saw the protests mainly taking place in Cairo. But now, this is different. Almost every city in Egypt that now is joining. And in my analysis, one major reason that's contributing to this escalation is some sort of a cognitive dissonance that's emerging as a result of this crisis, mainly to deal with the military, the Egyptian military. The Egyptian military historically has been viewed by the Egyptian people as with this very sacred role and picture and bright picture, rosy picture about the Egyptian military is protecting the Egyptian people. Now, to try to see all over of what they learned all the past years, to see the military cracking down on the Egyptians. So to reconcile between the rosy pictures of the Egyptian army protecting the Egyptian people and cracking down on them at the same time has definitely tarnished the picture of the Egyptian military. And
if it goes on like this, could Sisi lose some of that mandate which he apparently got in the protest that came out to support him when he called for it?
That is definitely a strong possibility, because now what is happening as a result of this cognitive dissonance more on the collective level is a redefinition or viewing of the role of the military and the Egyptian military. If we go just back days, even not years, days before June 30th, and what the speeches delivered by Morsi and the speeches delivered by Sisi himself about describing actually the Egyptian military as protecting the country, and even in the words of Sisi saying the Egyptian military is the lion that's protecting the country, and the lion takes care of the children and doesn't hurt his children and all of that. So this kind of narrative is for the Egyptian people to switch and to try to reconcile these old images and these old understandings and beliefs of the role of the military to what is happening now. I think this is going to take some time, and creating this dissonance on the public level, on the general level, is going to contribute to more chaos and more situation, more protest and instability, at least in the coming weeks.
Will everybody see that narrative, that change in narrative that you're talking about, when you take into account the role of the media? A lot of the state and even the private media in Egypt are presenting a very different picture, presenting the pro-Morsi forces in not very flattering terms as elements that need to be cleansed from the country and so on and so forth.
This is definitely also something emerging to that sharp description of both sides, actually, not only of how the anti-Morsi are describing and the vice versa. So this sharp difference and in the narrative, on the political narrative of both sides, is widening the gap and is making it much more difficult to reconcile on the short run. To me, in my view, the major problem here is the process itself, the process of a transition, which has been strongly and severely undermined. It's not only about the clashes that are happening in Ramses or in other places. It's more of the transition itself, people losing trust in the transition process itself, and redefining and looking at the army from a different angle, that different from the past. So to lose trust in the transition itself, in this case, if this continues on the long run, we might see the birth of a new pattern that might replace the pattern that happened, that controlled the situation in the past, of trying to see more of a democratic transition taking place. This is no longer the case. The whole transition process is being questioned now, whether we're going to see the current process is continuing, or the democratic process is getting stronger in the coming weeks or months, or is going to we're going to see a different process emerging. And here, I think this is going to have questions over the future of the political process and the future of transition in Egypt, and where this is going to go. Because unless we gain or regain trust in this transition, in this democratic transition process, we might question, or we might see different roles and different positions by the Brotherhood or the anti-coup alliance or other parties, whether they will want to engage in more of a democratic process in the future, and with the hope of forging a new social contract within the Egyptian society. So we need to regain trust in the process and in the democratic transition process in order to be able to control on the long term and from a strategic point of view the transition.
Ibrahim Sharqiya, thanks so much for your thoughts on that. Let's bring you a full frame shot now of that picture near Ramses Square that is on fire. What you're looking at is the aftermath of the instability plaguing not only Cairo but several parts of Egypt tonight. Perhaps the most prominent display of that, the picture you're looking at right now in a very critical square in the Egyptian capital.
Hello everyone, 1900 hours GMT here in Al Jazeera. I'm Kamal Santamaria, back in the seat here for the next hour or so as we continue our live coverage of events in Egypt today. This day that was billed as a day of rage, a day of anger, pretty much turned out like that, not just in Cairo, right across the country as well. Ramses Square in Cairo, as Sammy was just saying, building on fire there. Ramses Square was the focal point for these protests, much in the way that Tahrir Square had been previously. That's been sealed off today. The protesters all trying to make their way towards Ramses Square. Latest developments for you now. Let's run you through them. A group calling itself the Anti-Coup Alliance has actually said these protests in Egypt will end soon. However, we've also got the Muslim Brotherhood calling for a week of nationwide protests starting on Saturday. The military had said it would deal with whoever breaks a nighttime curfew, quote, decisively, and according to law, that curfew's been in for 2 hours now. Our team on the ground says 95 people have been killed in Ramses Square. These are the pictures from earlier in the day in the mosque there. The bodies were piling up. Armed men reportedly shooting live ammunition on Morsi supporters. Security officials say the death toll has now risen to at least 60, so still a bit of disparity in the numbers. People defying the curfew, as we said, by protesting against the security crackdown. Forces moved in on Wednesday, you remember, to clear the pro-Morsi protest camps, and it's believed more than 600 people, that's the latest number, were killed across the country on Wednesday. Violence outside of Cairo too. The 4 people there were, killed in Ismailia. These are the first pictures we got out of there. Absolute chaos there. Another 7 killed in Egypt's second city of Alexandria. Also deaths in Fayoum and Damietta. In a moment, we're going to speak to our correspondents in Cairo for the very latest. First, this report is from Charles Stratford. He looks back at what's happened in Egypt in just the past few hours.
The dead lion rose on the floor of this makeshift hospital in a mosque close to Ramses Square in Cairo. Dozens of bodies wrapped in white cloth. Doctors have pleaded for help, saying security forces prevented ambulances and medical equipment from getting in.
There was blood sticking to our shoes as we went up the pink marble steps. Got inside, there was about an acre of mosque in which they were just wounded, moaning and crying, and paramedics trying to save them. And at the corner of the mosque beyond, to the left, there were lined up on the floor bodies in white shrouds. The doctor showed me some of the faces which had been completely blown away. He said there were exploding bullets used. I can't prove that, but certainly the faces, some of them were quite unrecognisable.
The protesters streamed out of mosques after Friday prayers. Police fired tear gas, and soon reports of injuries came in. The government has put in place a state of emergency, allowing the military to deploy at will to back up police. The government said peaceful protests are allowed, but warned that attempts to attack government institutions would be dealt with force, and if necessary, with live ammunition.
Today we are neither protesting for Morsi or any other person. We are here for the rights of those who were killed, the mosques that were burned, the Quran that is being stepped upon, and the oppression that the people are facing now.
A doctor at a Cairo hospital told Al Jazeera that staff were treating men, women and even some children for gunshot wounds. Protests turned violent in the city of Ismailia. In Alexandria, demonstrators turned out in their tens of thousands. They followed an ambulance carrying bodies of some of the dead killed earlier this week.
The country's security forces are engaging in the same behaviour that the former Mubarak regime did, burning churches and blaming it on the Brotherhood. And if the Brotherhood had weapons in their hands, they would have defended themselves. But instead, many of us are being killed.
The state of emergency law means a curfew started at 7 p.m. But protests continued in some places like here in the city of Asyut and in Hurghada on the Red Sea coast. State TV showed pictures of a building near Ramses Square in Cairo on fire. The Interior Ministry says the fire was started by demonstrators fighting with police nearby. The Anti-coup alliance called on protesters in the area to leave to avoid more casualties. Despite the violence and the number of dead, the group has called for more protests in the days ahead. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera.
A good comprehensive wrap of what's been going on around Egypt today. Just want to talk to you about Alexandria briefly. These some of the pictures there from earlier today. You see what's been going on there, and correspondent telling us earlier about the sort of different nature of the clashes there. 7 was the death toll we had, and now the director of the main hospital in Alexandria is telling us it's actually at 21. Trying to get confirmation on that, but that's coming from the main hospital in Alexandria, a death toll of 21 there, as opposed to 7 is what it was earlier. Right, let's start talking to our correspondents on the scene at the moment. Simon McGregor-Wood is first up. He's on the line from Nasser City in Cairo. 2 hours into the curfew period. Simon, tell us what you're seeing, what you're hearing.
Well, it's very relatively quiet where I am. I'm a long way from Ramses Square now, Sammy, and this is pretty much as it has been since the coup started, since the curfew was imposed a couple of days ago. The traffic is, well, surprisingly there are a few cars out on the street outside the building I'm staying in. We occasionally hear the sound of military helicopters coming across this area. And about 20 minutes ago, we heard a sort of sporadic crackle of gunfire not too far away. Very difficult to know what that was about. But in this part of Cairo, well east of Ramses Square, the curfew seems to be pretty tight and being observed pretty well.
Take us back then, if it's a little bit quiet. Now tell us what it was like earlier when you were out amongst the marchers, the people out marching on their way at least towards Ramses Square.
Yeah, so we joined up with a march that from a mosque not very far from here in Nasser City. And, I mean, one of the things that struck us as we sort of started to film and talk to people there was that it seemed to be a different group of people to that we'd spent so much time with in the sit-in in Rabah Square, which was so forcibly broken up on Wednesday. It seemed to be less an exclusive Muslim Brotherhood march and more a more diverse group of people. There was one very smart lady I spoke to. I asked her if she was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. She looked appalled, and she said, "Do I look like a member of the Muslim Brotherhood?" She said, "No, I'm a businesswoman. I'm a wealthy person," she said, "but I'm here because I want freedom." And that was not the only voice of that kind. It seemed this group of people marching towards Ramses Square, I have to say that it was a new group of people joining this protest simply because they were so appalled at the violence that they'd seen on Wednesday. Having said that, I would draw a distinction between the people that we're seeing in the images, the television images in Ramses Square, the people that seem to be taking the brunt of the casualties from all this shooting, I'm not sure many of the people that we spoke to at the beginning of the day made it that far into the square and were necessarily willing to put themselves in the line. But in general terms, at the beginning of the day, I think we were struck by the number of different voices we were hearing, different kinds of Egyptians who, for the first time, were willing to put their voices and their feet on the street in opposition to the military.
Thanks for that, Simon. Simon McGregor-Woods on the line there, telling us about what he's seen in amongst the protests today. Where will we take you next? Aswan, this is further south in Egypt. Not the greatest picture at this point, obviously, because it's nighttime now, but if you listen... You can hear the... sorry, we lost the shot there on the screen, but you can hear a lot more sound ongoing there, protests ongoing there at this late hour in Cairo, in Egypt. In Cairo, though, is Shireen Tadros, who's in our bureau there. Shireen, lots to talk through. Developments come thick and fast over the hours. First of all, you know, we've been seeing the pictures of this burning building near Ramses Square. What have you got on that?
Yes, that's the Arab contractors building. It's been burning for over an hour now. No sign of the fire engines that should be putting that fire out. A lot of people concerned that fire will start spreading to other buildings. It's in the Ramses area in downtown Cairo, very close to where protesters are still gathering. And according to the Interior Ministry, what happened was that there was some fighting between police and Morsi's supporters in front of a police station that is very close to that area as well, and then that building caught fire. Now, as until now, we haven't heard of anyone injured, no one was in the building, but we're watching that closely. We're also hearing about fighting in an area that's close to Ramses, an area called Shubra in Cairo still, fighting between the police and Morsi supporters. We don't have a lot of information about that or number of injuries, but some of the pictures that we were seeing on independent and privately owned channels here in Egypt showed that they looked quite fierce.
So is the short story, Shireen, that the curfew's not worked and that it probably wasn't ever going to work, that the people were always going to stay out on the streets after, you know, an intense day out across Egypt?
I think that's too much to say, simply because in the last 2 nights we have seen that curfew respected, at least in Cairo, though of course there have been marches and protests in other cities. But in general, it is being observed by the general population, because if you compare it to earlier on in the year when Mohamed Morsi imposed a curfew and people were actually playing football on the streets to defy that curfew, that's how little respect people had for it. Of course, it's a different time, it was a different context, but it does show you that that sort of fear of authority of the military and the security forces is definitely back on the streets of Egypt. And as you come here to the office very close to curfew time, it's very easy to feel the might of that curfew. Shops, businesses, cafes, you can't order food after 7 p.m. here. People close and their shops and they actually board them up. So there is certainly a feeling, people know and are feeling the presence of this curfew.
Okay, that's good, Shireen. It kind of sets us straight on who's observing it and how it is being observed and the effect it does have, because it can be difficult from here to see exactly how it would play out. One more thought from you, if you wouldn't mind, about ongoing protests. I've seen different media releases, different statements about another week of daily protests. Is that coming from the Brotherhood? Is that coming from the anti-coup alliance?
The statement that we've seen is from the anti-coup alliance, right. And that's a broad coalition of different parties and groups and people, in fact, who are supporting the reinstatement of Mohamed Morsi and more generally against the military and what's been happening, what the military have been doing here in the last few days. So the anti-coup alliance called for a week of departures, what they're calling it. They're saying today marks the first day of a week of departures daily protests and rallies like we've been seeing today, but to continue for 7 days, very similar to the week of departure that was called for during the uprising in 2011 that was meant to, at the end of it, lead to the ousting of Hosni Mubarak. So the anti-coup alliance really trying to create the same sort of momentum as we had in 2011. The end of this week is meant to be almost like a deadline for the military chief Sisi to step down.
Lots of information there from
thank you
Shireen
for all of
Tadros,
that.
Lots of information there from the
Shireen
Cairo
Tadros,
Bureau
our
correspondent in the Cairo Bureau just now. Latest developments for you, just to round it all up again, as Shireen was talking about there, the anti-coup alliance, which has said protests in Egypt will end in the next hour, but they are calling for that week of nationwide protests starting Saturday. The military had said it would deal with whoever breaks a nighttime curfew, quote, decisively and according to law. Our teams on the ground say 95 people have been killed in Cairo's Ramses Square. Armed men reportedly shooting live ammunition on Morsi supporters there. In fact, we heard from one gentleman who talked about helicopters firing on him and the people he was with there. Security officials, though, say the death toll has now risen to at least 60. Some people defying the curfew still, protesting against that security crackdown on Wednesday. To give you the history of it, of course, when forces moved in on Wednesday to clear the pro-Morsi protest camps. It's believed more than 600 people were killed across the country on Wednesday. And the violence outside Cairo too, 4 killed in Ismailia in the north, 21 is the latest number we have from Egypt's second city, Alexandria. That was the director of the main hospital telling us that. And then deaths in Fayoum and Damietta as well. We should focus just on Alexandria a bit more. As I say, the director of the main hospital, they're telling us 21 people have been killed there, and that goes up from 7, which was the earlier death toll. Jane Ferguson's our correspondent who's been reporting from there. Last seen, Jane, when I saw you on videotape, reporting from inside a car because the situation was too dangerous and too unpredictable. What's it like now?
Kamal, things are much calmer now in the street. People seem to be dispersing, the protests themselves melting away as eventually people start to honour the curfew that really kicked in well over 2 hours ago here. But we're also hearing from the director of the emergency medical centre here that the death toll has risen to 41 people. He's saying those are the numbers that he has registered there, and he does expect it to rise by a few more, simply because some of the bodies that are coming in from private hospitals where they can't be officially registered with an official such as himself. So it's quite a jump in the death toll there, and most of the wounds he's describing as gunshot wounds. But like I said before, it's not clear if those gunshot wounds were inflicted by security forces. As we have said from here throughout the day, it's been much more confusing, much more tense in terms of which groups are facing off with which groups here. Often plainclothes civilian groups clashing with one another, and deaths resulting from that.
Right, that is what I was going to ask you. Why is it more confusing? Perhaps you can outline the presence of the anti-Morsi groups there as well.
Yes, there have been a lot of anti-Morsi groups on the ground. Now, in terms of numbers, they've been enormously outnumbered by pro-Morsi. That's quite normal here. Alexandria is a very pro-Morsi city. But what we've been seeing is that the pro-Morsi groups organised into a protest, into large numbers. We went down to the protest earlier today as it marched up the road. Went on for several kilometres at least. I would have said well over 10,000 people there. The march just seemed to go on forever. Protesting fairly peacefully, but the peace was broken today when both sides, pro and anti, really clashed, and clashed sporadically again and again in various areas of the city. Now then, later in the day, when we were trying to gather news and move around the city, we noticed that there were almost vigilante-style checkpoints essentially set up by plainclothes. It seemed like civilians. They were certainly wearing plain clothes, carrying machetes and knives and sticks essentially, stopping cars, interrogating people. And so really sort of a near lawlessness scenario in certain streets there. And it's those groups that we believe are facing off with the pro-Morsi protests as a result, and those are scattering around the city, playing a bit of a cat and mouse game with one another throughout the town. So quite a concerning degradation of law and order here for several hours in the afternoon that seems to have calmed now. There are still a few people in the street. They seem to be making their way home. Now, again, when we get back to that death toll, people hurt from gunshot wounds, again, it's not clear whether those are from the security forces or from the two sides fighting one another.
Thanks for that. Jane Ferguson's on the line from Alexandria there, and hopefully I think we'll have a look at your taped report a little bit early just to get an idea, or later we'll have a look at that, and get an idea of what it was like for Jane reporting earlier in the day. Ibrahim Shakir still with us in the studio. He's from Brookings Doha Centre. Nice of you to stay with us to keep talking through this. Actually, what Jane said there, she was talking about people stopping the cars in the street and finding out who are you, where are you going, and all sorts of things. And Robert Fisk was saying that earlier as well, and Khalil Annan was saying, all these people were saying that. This is another element. We focus on the security forces and the protesters, but then you've got other groups. I mean, they just seem to be everyday people who are on edge, I guess, wanting to know who you are, where you're going. It's a sort of, I'm not going to say it's a lawless society, but people are taking things into their own hands as well. Well,
we are very close to that, actually, because now this is happening in not only in Cairo, but all over the country, in Ismailia and Dimyat and the rest of the country as well. So, and this is very frightening, is that to have the feeling that we're losing control of the situation. Even the military is losing control of the situation, whether it's in Cairo or the rest of the country. This is going to open the door for many unknown groups and people that they're coming from different sources. So lawlessness probably is not the exact word, but we're pretty close to this sort of chaos.
But yet, as Shireen was saying earlier, I'm sure you heard her saying that, you know, we were talking earlier, we were talking about the idea that the curfew just, you know, would be completely ignored. It is. She was saying people do, and certainly the businesses and the everyday people there are saying, no, we're staying inside, we don't want a part of this. So that does work to a degree. It kind of puts the lid on it for a little bit until day breaks again.
The major problem here is that the curfew, which is a very credible test to the level of stability or instability that the country will have, has so far failed, because supposed to be the curfew is supposed to be in effect for now almost 1 hour or even more, and we're still seeing, you know, more people in the streets and many people in the streets, and no one is, you know, has, as we expected in our previous discussion, conversation today, that we, especially in the beginning, we might not see the Egyptians are really listening to the curfew that is declared by the military. So we should watch very carefully the coming hours or the rest of the night and how this is going to develop in Egypt. I think if we continue to see this level of defiance of the curfew and people coming from all different sources and seeing people from different places in different places, I think that the curfew might fail, and if the curfew might fail, then I should be careful and watch how the military is going to respond to this, because as also we discussed today, is that I'm not concerned too much about how the people respond to the curfew, but I'm more concerned of how the military will respond to the curfew. Because if the military do what they were threatening of doing, of responding in a decisive way to those who break the curfew, then this will open the door for more protests and more instability.
I'll tell you one, sorry, I'll tell you one area where the military has been effective. Maybe we can have the live shot of Tahrir Square just for a moment. I just like bringing this up every now and then, just because, you know, we talked so much about Tahrir Square. It was where it all happened when the revolution started, and it's empty now because the military cut it off. They said no one's going there, doesn't matter which side you're on, no one's going there. I guess what it does is it disperses people to other parts, but the military has got a really strong presence on the streets and have said we can deploy more if we need to. So I guess I'm not going to use the word successful, but it's been effective for them in some ways, for the military.
Well, it has been successful in a Tahrir Square, as we see in the picture. But we need to keep in mind that Cairo does not have only one square. Cairo has many squares, actually. And this is something we warned about from the very beginning, is that to have your goal as the military is to disperse people from Rab al-Adawiyya is not going to solve the problem. Because if you disperse them from Rab al-Adawiyya, they will just go to other squares. And that's what proved to be the case, after Rabaa al-Adawiyya we started hearing about Ramses Square, and who knows who's going to be next. And as of what I called it before is that we start to see revolution of squares, or squares revolution in Egypt. We're seeing more squares joining in the city, and this is what happens, you know, when you crack down on protesters and you try to forbid people from protesting peacefully. This is right. I am concerned that this is going to escalate in the absence of a serious, credible, important initiative that to be taken is try to stop this chaos and to try to bring the parties more into a settlement.
Well, Ibrahim's been talking about Ramses Square there, and a little bit earlier we spoke to someone called Saeed Mohammed who'd been out there in Ramses Square heading with the protesters. He returned home, spoke to us on the phone. He tells us what he saw there, particularly about the helicopters which were actually firing on the crowds. Have a listen.
We're starting walking in innocent people, and we don't have weapons, we don't have anything with us. We just have, vinegar and towels in order if they shoot us as they done in Rabaa al-Adawiyya Square with smoke bombs or anything, so we can, in order not to smell this smoke. We found thugs shooting us from all over the buildings, across us directly, and then what was new today is that the helicopters, or the armed helicopters, started to shoot us, the innocent people, when we were walking in groups. Suddenly we found these helicopters flying above us and started to shoot us from the helicopters on us directly, not bombs this time. It was bullets. Came was direct. My friend was beside me, died directly. He took a shot in his neck and he was died, and the other one beside after 2 to 3 people. So this made something which is something different I never saw before.
That was Saeed Mohammed, who was out in Ramses Square describing, as he said there, his friend who was shot by one of the bullets from the helicopter. Someone else who was out in Ramses Square went there on hearing the reports about the number of deaths there and the bodies piling up in the mosque. That was Robert Fisk, who's Middle East correspondent for the British newspaper The Independent. Have a listen to his description of today's events in Cairo.
The crowd was so big, I think it may have been 30,000, 40,000, it wasn't a million as some people are claiming. Of course they swarmed around the square, they came up close to the Ramses Street police station, and the cops on the roof, who were quite visible to us. I saw one man. It was interesting to actually see the face of the killer, if you like, a moustache, frightened face, waving a gun, shouting obscenities, and then started shooting. And the policeman to his left, who had an automatic weapon, had a hood on, very chilling sort of, appearance suddenly, and he started shooting, as did some other cops. And I moved further up the road with my driver, who of course is an Egyptian. And at one point a bullet went right between him and me with a whizz and then went off into the crowds, and he actually started running away. I don't blame him. I had to jump into his car while it was moving actually, but again, I don't blame him for that. He was frightened.
It's been a focal point. Shireen Tadros there in Cairo. It's been a focal point, hasn't it, this mosque in Ramses Square. Tell us more about what's happened there today.
Yes, that mosque called the Fath Mosque, it was being used as a makeshift hospital. A lot of the bodies from those who have been killed in that square were taken to that hospital, and what we're hearing now is that the security forces have surrounded the mosque, and we're hearing that there's gunfire all around. Now this is coming to us from someone who is inside the mosque, someone who was earlier in the day protesting against the military, and they're saying that the security forces are firing at the mosque and at essentially what's become this makeshift hospital. Now the Interior Ministry, which we just spoke to, wouldn't confirm that there was gunfire, any gunfire at all, but what they did say is that they have been surrounding that mosque because there are people inside and people in that area, and that's breaking the curfew.
So it becomes a whole sort of secondary crisis, doesn't it, Shireen? You've got people obviously worrying about what will happen next and the sort of unexpected nature of anything, but they're still trying to deal with what happened today, deaths early today, and really still what happened on Wednesday as well.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think it's a situation here where people are so concerned and worried that they wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is you check your phone or the television and see if anything else has happened the night before. There's a sense of dread here, a sense of depression really that has come across the country because of what's happening, and also a sense of disbelief that in a single week you can have these hundreds of people that have been killed by the security forces. Every day seems to bring a different crisis. We're seeing now the beginning of what has been called as another week of demonstrations, protests that will take place. Meanwhile, what you're hearing from the security forces is a very strong tone indeed, them talking about using live ammunition against anyone who attacks them or public buildings. So it's really a very, a very depressing situation. And then add to that, of course, the media, either state media or independently owned or privately owned stations that are using very, aggressive rhetoric, inflaming the situation even more.
Yeah, absolutely all-encompassing, isn't it? Shireen Tadros is in our Cairo bureau this evening. Thanks, Shireen. We'll talk to you again in a moment. Pictures on the right-hand side of your screen, you're seeing Ramses Square in Cairo, which is, Shireen was just describing the mosque that was there that became effectively a makeshift hospital and makeshift morgue today. This is nearby, building on fire, the Arab Contractors Company building on fire. Near Ramses Square in Cairo, just one of many events that have been ongoing today in Egypt, which we're going to run you through now, the latest developments as we approach 1/2 the hour. First of all, the Anti-Coup Alliance, that umbrella group, which says protests in Egypt will end in the next hour, but then they're also calling for a week of nationwide protests starting Saturday. The military had said it would deal with whoever breaks a nighttime curfew, quote, decisively and according to law. Our team on the ground says 95 people have been killed in Cairo's Ramses Square. This goes on from what Shireen was talking about just a moment ago. Armed men reportedly shooting live ammunition on Morsi supporters. Security officials, though, saying the death toll has now risen to at least 60, so still some disparity in the numbers. People defying the curfew in protest against, this is for the historical reference, against the security crackdown on Wednesday. That was when the forces moved in, the security forces moved in, they cleared out the pro-Morsi protest camps, and the number we have at the moment is that more than 600 people were killed across the country on that day alone. It goes past Cairo, of course. These are the first pictures we saw out of Ismailia a few hours ago. 4 people killed in the northeast. Another 21, as Jane Ferguson was telling us, the latest death toll coming out of Egypt's second city of Alexandria. And deaths in Fayoum and Damietta in the Nile Delta as well.